Shabbat Shalom. Happy Sabbath. Again, we are very thankful that Yah has spared our lives. And we're here this morning to thank him for his love that envelopes us in his grace. Today we want to look at the subject, teaching beyond the reach of fools. Teaching beyond the reach of fools. And perhaps at first instance, we ought to define what we mean by fools. When we look at the word fool in scriptures, we're not merely looking at someone who is unintelligent, someone who is unlettered, uneducated. But often the indictment is one of morals. The word, the psalmist says, the fool in his heart said, there is no Yah. And so this morning we want to look at 2 or 3 characters in the word that the Bible defines as fools. We want to look at that moment, that analgesic moment of King David when Abigail came to him and spoke wisdom to him, and it relieved his pain. She was unto him like an analgesia. We want to look at that Kodak moment that was just read. The passage refers to him as the rich fool. And of course, we want to look at that captain of King Shaul's soldiers that died like a fool. And so this morning, we are looking at people, characters, in the context of the changing times. But we have an unchanging Yah. The times are changing, the principles are changing, but Yah says, I change not. And if he doesn't change, the question must be, why are we changing? We see the very assemblies that are established to bring truth to the world, but they are sponsoring evil. And so we must address that. We see lamps that are not lit in the world in which we live. And we are admonished to seek after wisdom. But that principle is honored only in its breach, not in its principle. And so this morning, we want to take even a cursory look at an analysis of the culture that reveals to us a radical and pervasive irrationality. In a sense, we see principles, fundamental principles laid down by the word of Yah are now being ignored. Churches are teaching that which Yah calls an abomination ought to be welcomed into his assembly. And I ask myself the question, where are we in time? And so I'm going to ask you to join me in the book of Luke that was just read, Luqos, chapter 12. Luqos, chapter 12. And we will begin here at verse 13. And someone from the crowd said to him, that's Yeshua, "Teacher, speak to my brother to divide his inheritance with me." And immediately, instinctively, may I add, there is a curious affectation about his style and a kind of falsetto note ranging beyond reasonableness. The word says he came from the crowd. "Teacher, speak to my brother to divide his inheritance with me." Oh, yes, that affectation doesn't have anything in it that gives you the impression of respect. So he seeks to enlist the Messiah to be an arbitrator in his case against his brother. Tell him to give me some of what he has. And so the Messiah said to him, he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or divider over you?" Knowing full well that he is the judge of all the earth, he's asking him the question. And he said to them, "Mind and beware of greed, because one's life does not consist in the excess of his possessions." He immediately points the man to the commandment about covetousness. Sometimes we see people with things we know not how they get it, and we desire it, and we will do almost anything to get it and go to great length. And Yeshua says, beware of covetousness. Beware of greed. Tell my brother to give me some of what he has. Tell him. He didn't ask him to mediate the process and find out the detail whether there is a will, whether it's part of his own legacy. Tell him. And so that affectation is found wanton. It is. He gives us this picturesque view of arrogance, contempt, disdain, insolence. And so the first instance is Yeshua addresses the issue of greed before he gives us a parable. Beware of greed. Verse 16, he then spake a parable to them, saying, the land of a certain rich man yielded well. And he was reasoning within himself, saying, what shall I do, because I have no room to store my crops? This man, his wealth was superfluous to requirement. He had more than he needed. And the thought did not arrest him in the sense that he thought to give some to his neighbor, to remember the poor, to remember the assembly and Yah's work. He never thought to give anything to that, but he said, I'm going to build a barn bigger than I currently have. How this picture arrests the culture that we live in. And we see so many rich fools among us. The indictment of morals is on them. They are building yachts, airplanes, and barns, huge houses, businesses to store their wealth. But the word here says, the land of a certain man yielded much. The land belongs to Yah. He never thought to himself that I ought to give thanks unto the Creator. That thought never occurred to him. That all his possessions that he has belongs to Yah. Because I hear the word said, the earth is Yah and the fullness thereof, and they that dwell therein. And Yah is saying, every time you work, bring your first fruit to me. Yah says, bring me a tithe. Sometimes I hear people say they give a gift. And perhaps, I want to ask them, what do you mean? What do you mean? And maybe I have to ask them another question, a corollary to that question. Each month when you pay your rent, do you give a gift to your landlord? Do you? Well, let me say it clearly. A tithe is a debt that you pay. Are you with me? The earth is Yah, the land is his, everything is his, a cattle on 1,000 hills are his. So when you put in your tithe, you are paying a debt that you owe. You don't give a gift until you pay the debt. Gifts are offerings. We need to understand that. And a tithe is for every man, because every man uses the resource of Yah. Sometimes we think that a tithe is only for the people we call Christians. No. The land is his. And so we owe a debt. And it's interesting, some people sometimes think that, I've paid my 10%. And some will tell you, well, we don't pay tithes because we don't see tithe in the New Testament. I tell you what, the New Testament is a better covenant than the Old. So your responsibility is greater than the Old Testament. And moreover, Abraham was not a Christian. Neither was Jacob. And they both paid tithe. And you see, when he paid tithe in Hebrews chapter 7, all the Levites paid tithes. And so you've got to understand why Malachi cries out in chapter 3, saying, you have robbed Yah. Why? You robbed him in tithes and offering. And you see the differentiation here. Tithe is a debt that you owe because the land belongs to him. And he says, bring me your first fruit. And the offering is the gift that you bring. And so this rich fool here did not see the need to consider that. So the word says, verse 17, and he was reasoning within himself, saying, what shall I do because I have no room to store my crops? I better open a new bank account because the account that I have, I have too much money in it. And he said, I'm going to do this, pull down my storehouses and build greater and store all my crops and my goods there. How many people do that today? Oh, I must take care of my 401 and my pension, and so on and so forth. And they're planning for the future, and they forget that the breath that they have is on loan to them from the Creator. The land that they use to farm belongs to the Creator. Everything is his, and we are merely caretakers of his estate. This man was like that. Oh, yes. Then say to myself, life, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your case, eat, drink, and rejoice. That's how this culture thinks. I have my 401. I have money in the bank. I've paid off my house. I don't have a car payment. I'm sitting pretty. And even at that point, this man did not see the need to say, what can I give to the poor? How can I help the work of Yah? He didn't see that. Verse 20, but Elohim said to him, you mindless one, you fool. You see what fool looks like? He's not unintelligent. He's a businessman. And I hope no one gets the impression here that I'm saying being rich is a wrong. No, it's not. It's all right to have money. It's when money have you, even as this man. This night, says Elohim, your life shall be demanded from you, and who shall own what you have prepared? If I were to retrieve my breath from you tonight, all that you have, who will it go to? Why then won't you give thanks? Why don't you think beyond the insular confines of your own needs? You meanie, you fool, you mindless one, says the word. So is he who is storing up treasures for himself and is not rich towards Elohim. That's what the word says. They store up treasures on the earth, but they don't invest in the things that has eternal value. And he said to his taught ones, for this reason I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you shall eat, nor about the body, what you shall put on. The life is more than the food. The body is more than clothing. Look at the ravens. For they neither sow nor reap, which have neither storehouse nor granary, and Elohim feeds them. How much more valuable are you than the birds? How much more valuable? And so the Bible presents this man as a rich fool. And there are many rich fools in our world who have millions and billions, and they build fortunes. They build many Babels until Yah comes down and confuses them. But they never get to the point where they think of giving Yah that which belongs to him. And perhaps we ought to read Romans chapter 1, starting at verse 21. The word says, because that when they knew Yah, they glorified him not as Elohim, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible Elohim into the image made like the corruptible man, and to birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Wherefore Yahweh also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. What are they doing? Dishonoring their own bodies, because in their wealth and in their so-called wisdom, they have forgotten who Yah is. And that's why perhaps Aristotle, this philosopher, this Greek philosopher, makes the observation that in the brain of every wise man, there lurks in the corner a foolish man. Oh, yes. So this morning we're looking at teaching beyond the reach of fools, teaching beyond the reach of fools. And so we want to look at that. And let's turn to Proverbs chapter 26. Proverbs chapter 26, and it says, answer a fool according to his folly. What must he do? Answer a fool not according to his folly. And in the next verse, it says, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eye. So the first verse here says, answer not a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise. Lest you be like him yourself, if you answer the fool in his folly. And then answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. So we see this paradox. So the justification of the paradox is that it is true to the reality that it describes. Therein, biblical paradoxes reveal not only something real, but also genuinely, spiritually, something that is everlasting. And only wisdom knows the difference. And so, to the heedless, to the unwary, to the gullible, they see a paradox as a kind of apparent contradiction. They cannot yet see that it conveys truth beyond the reach of their comprehension. So this man has money, wealth that is superfluous. But it never occurred to him to share it. Even though the scripture says it is better to give than to receive. But often we stretch our hands out to receive, but when it's time to give, we have a clenched fist. Why? Why? And so the Bible calls him a fool. A fool. He's a fool. So let's turn to 2 Samuel, Shemuel Bet, chapter 3. And the word here says in verse 1, and the fighting between the house of Shaul and the house of David was long drawn out, but David was going on and was strong. And the house of Shaul, that's King Saul, was going on and was weak. And the sons were born to David in Hebron, and his firstborn was Amnon by Ahinoam the Jezreelite. And it lists his sons. But in verse 6, we're told, and it came to be while there was fighting between the house of Shaul and the house of David, that Abner was strengthening himself in the house of Shaul. And Shaul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, why have you gone into my father's concubine? Why? That's a serious question. Why have you gone into my father's concubine? And we need to understand that the harem of a Oriental monarch over there in the east, it was one considered the property of the king or his successor. And therefore, the taking of a woman belonging to the monarch carries the assertion, the assumption that if you take her, the kingdom is yours. So when Ishbosheth, which is Saul's son, accused Abner that you've gone into the concubine of my father, he sussed that Abner is after the throne which he sits on. The word here doesn't tell us that Abner was guilty. We don't see that. But it reminds us of Adonijah, one of David's son, who had earlier asked for Abishag, that young lady that kept David warm at night. But the word said he did not have relations with her. She just kept him warm. And so Adonijah saw her and wanted her in marriage and asked Solomon. And Solomon, being a wise man, recognized that in asking for David's young lady that kept him warm, he was asking for the throne, and he killed him. And so this is understood in Oriental culture. And so Ishbosheth recognized this at the same time. But it says that Abner was angry. He was angry. Oh, yes. And so he decided that he would make sure that David now becomes king over all of Israel. He would give up. So let's read. Verse 7 again for emphasis. And Shaul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, why have you gone into my father's concubine? And Abner was very displeased at the words of Ishbosheth, and said, am I a dog's head that belongs to Yehudah, that I show loving commitment to the house of Shaul, your father, to his brothers and to his friends today, and have not let you fall into the hand of David? But you charge me, you accuse me today with a sin concerning this woman. You kind of get the impression that he's challenging the charge. Elohim does so to Abner, and more also, if I do not do for David as Yahweh has sworn to him. Now, my question to Abner is this. You are long since known that the kingdom was promised to King David. Why were you prolonging it by fighting against David? And you know that Yah had anointed him and said he would be king. Why? And had Ishbosheth had not accused you today, you would not have given thought to the idea of handing over the kingdom to the person to whom it truly belonged. Why? Why do we do this? Could it be that Abner really had his eyes on the throne of Shaul? Which takes us back to the earlier reading we read about covetousness. Points in back to the commandment, which is what Yeshua did to that rich fool. Be careful of greed. You know, in the culture that we live, you can go into public supermarket and you could take up a fruit and you eat that, and if they see you, they would arrest you. But you can take your neighbor's wife or your neighbor's husband. That's the greatest of all theft. And the state said it's all right. In fact, we live in a state that said no fault. You can steal your neighbor's husband and you steal your neighbor's wife, and there is no fault. The word says, do not covet your neighbor's wife. Does it not say that? The state says it's all right. So my point is that even the church is sponsoring evil now. Because when people put away their wives and their husbands and they get another one, the church marries them. But the word says otherwise. So Abner here decides that he will go away and seek after David and turn over the kingdom to David. I'm going to give it to him. In verse 13 it says, and David saw good I make a covenant with you. Only one matter I am asking of you. You do not see my face unless you bring Michal, daughter of Shaul, when you come. This is my first wife. Bring her. David wants his first wife back. This is the wife of his youth, according to Malachi. This is the wife of his youth. Bring her back. David then sent messengers to Ishbosheth, son of Shaul, saying, give me my wife Michal, to whom I became engaged for 100 foreskin of the Philistines. That's what it cost me. And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, and Paltiel, son of Lahish, but her husband went with her to Bahumim, going on and weeping behind her. And Abner said to him, go, turn back. And he returned back. So Abner, having been accused, decided that he will make sure that David gets the full kingdom of Israel. Verse 19, and Abner also spoke in the hearing of Benjamin, and Abner also went to speak in the hearing of David in Hebron, all that seemed good to Israel, and all the house of Benjamin. And Abner and 20 men with him came to David at Hebron, and David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. Now understand what's happening here. Abner is the leader of Shaul's military, whereas Joab is the leader of Israel's army. Understand what is happening here. David does not consult with Abner. And so the house of Saul is now in conversation with David, and Joab doesn't know what the conversation is about. Moreover, this man had killed Joab's brother Asahel before. So pain and anger and distress and thoughts, they conspire together. And the word says, and see, verse 22, the servant of David and Joab came from a raid and brought much spoil with them, but Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had set him away and he had gone in peace. Now, it seemed to me that David knew that if Joab is around, Joab would take umbrage with his meeting with Abner, so he sent him away. But when he came back, the men went and told Joab that Abner was here. Now, if you are the leading officer of the army and you heard that the leader of the opposite army was in town talking to your boss, how would you feel? Verse 24, and Joab went to the sovereign, went to the king, and said, what have you done? See, Abner has come to you. Why is it that you sent him away and he has already gone? You know that Abner, son of Ner, came to deceive you. You know you're going out and you're coming in, and to know all that you're doing. He's a spy. This is espionage, David. So Joab thought. Joab then left David and went and sent messengers after Abner and brought him back from the well of Sirah, but David did not know it. Perhaps Joab is thinking, he's not going to get my job. I am the general here. I'm the 4-star general. And another general from the opposite army is not going to come and take my position. So the best thing to do is to slay the enemy. That's what he's thinking. And David heard it afterwards and said, well, it says, let's do verse 27. Then Abner returned to Hebron, and Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him privately, and there struck him in the stomach so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. Did you get that? Joab, David's general, and it's also his nephew, his sister's son, went after this man, Abner, lured him out of the city's gate. And you can understand the intrigue here. Hebron is a city of refuge. He could not kill him in the city of refuge. It's against the law. So he lured him outside of the gate and daggered him. How many people has Satan lured out of the house of Yah, out of the church, into Hollywood, into the movie theaters, into the dance halls? Because he knows that the house of Yah, if the truth is being spoken, is a place of safety. But then by circumstances, he daggered them. Sometimes it's a young woman who leaves the church and she gets pregnant by a Joab. Sometimes it's a producer from Hollywood who writes a Joab's check and moves them out of the work of Yah. I think of that great singer, Sam Cooke. A change is going to come. And did you hear that sound? It is the sound of the man who is working on the chain gang. That beautiful, velvet, melodious voice. I recall when they interviewed him, why did you leave the church? His father was a priest. He said, because of my financial situation. Hollywood wrote him a check. And the word said, not this word, but the words of the culture, he got shot in a motel, a seedy hotel. And perhaps you could conclude that he died foolishly. That Sam Cooke. We could think of many others. Michael the Jackson. Elvis the Presley. We could think of Whitney the Houston. They all started in the house of safety, in the city of refuge, and they were lured out by Satan like Joab, and circumstances daggered them. And the word says that, and they buried Abner, verse 32. in Hebron, and the sovereign, that's King David, lifted up his voice and wept in the burial site of Abner, and all the people wept, and the sovereign King David sang and lament over Abner, said, should Abner die as a fool? Abner died as a fool. Our topic today is teaching beyond the reach of fools. Doesn't mean you're uneducated at all. Doesn't mean you're not intellectual. It means that you have in the corner of your brain, in the corner, in the recess, in the crevice, something foolish driving you to act unwisely. Oh, yes. So let's go now to chapter 25 of First Shemuel, Shemuel Aleph. The word says, there was a man in Maon, and his work was in Carmel. And the man was very great, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he came to be sharing his sheep in Carmel. Now, perhaps I ought to share this with you so you get some context to it. This man, whose name is Nabal, is a fool. That's what his name means, folly. He's a fool. Now, David has a counselor by the name of Ahithophel. The word says of Ahithophel, when he speaks, he's the original seer. When he speaks, it's as if a man had sought the oracle of Yah. And so he was with David and with Absalom. David had him as a counselor from the very outcome. And David relied on him. Interestingly, he is the grandfather of Bathsheba. He is the father of Eliam, who is the father of Bathsheba. And so Ahithophel's name means the brother of a fool. And he's also from Carmel. So we could conclude that Ahithophel and Nabal are brothers. So let's read on. This man, Nabal, is married to a beautiful woman, Abigail. And perhaps you're wondering, how could this be? But in ancient time, as in certain cultures today, these marriages are arranged from early years. It could be as a child, she was promised to him, not knowing that he would grow up to be this sulk. And we know people today are married to Nabals. There are many Nabals in our country and in the world, rich and mean-spirited and tight with their wallets. These are the Nabals in our world. They have much to live on, but seemingly nothing to live for, because they do not recognize the Creator. And you can understand why the Creator said, if I was hungry, I would not let you know. I would not let you know. So the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife, Abigail, and she was a woman of good understanding and beautiful, but the man was hard, and evil in his doing, and he was of Caleb. Now, Caleb, as you know, was one of the two men who, when the census was taken of the approximately 3 million people in Egypt, made it to the promised land. The other one was Joshua. Now, he's from, and I'm showing you that it's not even about the family you came from. It's about your morals, because these are descendants of Caleb. But he was different from Caleb. All right? And David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing sheep. Now, David had been looking after his sheep, protecting the men who were looking after it. So David, in his own thought, think, well, this is all right. We're going to be all right because the man is having a festival today. He's shearing sheep and we are hungry. So go down and tell him that it was it's us. We looked after his sheep and we cared for his men. Let him know. Tell him that it's David. Go and tell him. In fact, hurry up. And David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel, and you shall come to Nabal and greet him in my name. Tell him it's David. The one who killed Goliath. That's the one who saved Israel. Tell him it's King David, the son of Jesse. And if you want to go back, you could tell him all about Ruth and Elimelech and tell him that where I'm from. Tell him. Are you with me? 1 Samuel chapter 25. And say this, long live and peace to you and peace to your house and peace to all that you have. Make sure when you greet him, you say all these things, but be proper. This is the protocol. I want you to address him and make sure there is no disrespect. Honor this man, but he's a fool. It's like throwing pearls to a swine. He's a fool. He's rich, but he's a fool. He doesn't know Yah. Spiritual things are spiritually discerned. And now I have heard, and now I have heard that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us. We did not put them to shame, and not a speck of theirs was missing all the days that we were in Carmel. Ask your young men and speak to the men, and they will tell you, they will testify that we treated them okay. So my young men, find favor in your eyes, for we come on a good day. Please give whatsoever comes to your hand, to your servants, and to your son David. Tell him all that. And the young men of David came and spoke to Nabal according to all these words in the name of David, and waited. But Nabal answered the servants of David and said, who's David? What? Who is David? And who is the son of Yishai? That's Jesse. The servants who are running away from their masters have become many nowadays. And shall I take my bread? You have people like that, They have more than they need. And they would not give you a loaf. These are the Nabals of our culture. Their houses are up on the hills, and they look down and they see the men under the bridges, and it matters not to them. They pass them in their cars and in their yachts. These are the Nabals. Why should I take what I have and give it to them? How often we hear them say, I am self-made. When did you make yourself? And we talk like this. He's a self-made millionaire or self-made billionaire. And I hear Yah said, I made all men. But that's the culture. A changing world, but an unchanging Yah. And so the men left, of course, shamed, ridiculed, repudiated. They went back. And they told David what happened. But someone overheard the conversation that was taking place. And they knew that this man is a meanie, but his wife is a beautiful woman. She's beautiful not only on the outside, but on the inside. That's what beauty looks like. If it's not inside, it doesn't manifest. You can put it on. That's why people wear makeup, because you can't make up beauty. Beauty is internal, and it reflects on the outside. Are you with me? And that was Abigail. And the word says in verse 14, and one of the young men informed Abigail, the wife of Nabal, saying, see, David has sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, but he scoffed at them. But the men were very good to us and did not put us to shame, nor did we miss any items all the days we accompanied them when we were in the fields. They were a wall to us, both by night and day, all the days we were with them tending the sheep. And now know and see what you should do, for evil has been resolved against our master and against all his household, and he is too much of a son of a Belial to speak to. We can't approach him. He's a sulk. Whenever we try to go to him, his very face puts us off. Are you with me? His countenance is such that it's a repellent. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep, made ready 5 measures of roasted grain and 100 clusters of raisin and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. And she said to her servants, pass over before me. See, I am coming after you. But she did not inform her husband, Nabal. And this is what I call David's analgesic moment. He is aroused with anger. He's decided, I'm going to take him out. I'm going to pay him evil for evil. Here I was looking after him and caring for him and giving him all this service, and he could not even say thanks. All I'm asking him is for a few loaves for my men to have for lunch. He thought what he had was his, not knowing it was Yah's. And this is a king. David had been anointed years before to be king. This was the man who killed Goliath. And he asked the question, who is David? That's an insult. A man of valor? Did he not hear the songs that the ladies sang? Saul had killed 1,000, but this David, he killed 10,000. Where was he when these things were being sung? Where? Abigail made haste, the word says. She made haste because she knew trouble don't set like rain. They tell us where I come from. Are you with me? And so you got to understand what the troubadour from Trenchtown was saying. David felt that, his belly was full, but he was still hungry. Are you with me? And so you understand also that the rain was falling on Nabal's house, but where I come from, on David's house, they would say the dirty was tough. One man is bursting at the seams with wealth, and the other man doesn't know where his next meal is coming from, and the thought doesn't even occur to him, let's reach out. Reach out to him. Another rich fool, may we say? What's that topic? Teaching beyond the reach of fools. That's our topic. And so we see the Bible categorize them and classify them why they're called fools. How many fools do we have today? People who live their lives aimlessly, thinking that once they die, that's it. Not knowing that there is a judgment for the wicked, and when he comes, the dead in Christ will rise, and those later on in the white throne judgment will be called from their graves, and the sea will empty them out. And they will have to face the King of the universe, and every knee shall bow, and every tongue shall confess that he is Yah. Will you then call your bank manager? Will you then call your accountant? Will you then look at your beautiful edifice, your house, your beautiful car? Will you? And what will you say to the king when he asks you, that well, those resources I gave to you, what did you do with it? All you did was build bigger barns and made yourself comfortable. But you never turned an eye to look at the Lazaruses around you. Did you? What makes you so mean? Delilah asked Samson, Samson, what makes you so strong? Why? But Delilah misunderstood the source of Samson's strength, for the symbol of his strength. His hair was only a symbol of his strength. The source was Yahweh. And he had a covenant relationship with him. Wear your hair as a Nazarite, Samson, and in that way, if you are obedient to me, I will make you strong. And so there are many today who Yah has gifted with wealth. But they think that money, Yah's money in their hand, belongs to them. They think that. They did not know that it was intended for them to share with others. You better ask that young man who had just a few fishes and some loaves. He went on a trip one day, and there were 5,000 men, and they didn't have lunch. And I read that Yeshua took his lunch. In America, they would say that's communism. And he shared the young man's loaf and his fishes and gave it to 5,000. And we would say, how could that be? How could you take what I have? Whose is it? Who made the fish? Who made the wheat? Huh? The word said, and this man's land yielded much. Whose land is it? You know, it amazes me and intrigues me at the same time in that we know what Revelation chapter 13 says, that soon some will not be able to buy or sell while their bank accounts are bulging and their neighbors' bellies are roaring. And they call themselves Christians. Are you with me? What will they say? And so Abigail, I wish we had some more Abigails. Wise. She knew that trouble was brewing and it was going to be rapid because David is a man of valor. He knows how to draw a sword. You don't believe me? Ask Goliath. And so she was going to ameliorate the problems. She's going to get around this thing, and she brought that which he has. And she never told the fool anything. Never told him anything. And she said to her servant, pass over, you go, you race ahead. And David had said, only in vain have I protected all that this one has in the wilderness, so that not a speck was missing. David began to regret the fact that he looked after this man. And Abigail saw David. This is verse 33. And she hastened to come down from the donkey. And I mean, you got to understand, you know, she didn't have a car in those days. And fell on her face. You see what kind of woman she is? She has respect. She fell on her face before David and bowed down to the ground. The culture we live in, not even the young people say good morning. Not anymore. And fell at his feet and said, on me, my master, let this crookedness be on me. And please let your female servants speak in your ears and hear the words of your female servant. Please let not my master regard the man of Belial, Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him, because I, your female servant, did not see the young men of my master whom you sent. And now, my master, as Yahweh lives and as your being lives, since Yahweh has withheld you from coming to bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hand, now then let your enemies be as Nabal. This is her husband. You see wisdom? Sometimes we think that our relatives are the ones we should protect. They went to Yeshua one day and said, your mother wants to talk to you. He says, who is my mother? My mother and my brothers are those who do the will of my Father. So listen to her. She's saying, let your enemies be as Nabal, even those seeking evil against my master. And now this present which your female servant has brought to my master, let it be given to the young man who follow my master. Please forgive the transgression of your female servant, for Yahweh is certainly making a steadfast out for my master. How could she know that David is going to be king and her husband doesn't know? How? And if a man rises to pursue you and seek your life, and the life of my master has been bound in the bundle of the living with Yahweh your Elohim, then the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the pocket of a sling. This is analgesic moment. His pain was taken away. His thirst was quenched with beautiful words, well structured, with intonation, with that tone. And the affectation was not to impress, it was genuine. And it was not beyond the range of reasonableness. This is what we call wisdom, juxtaposed against those characters we looked at this morning. And so, Yah wants us to understand that we too must realize that we are brought here for a purpose. David picks up the theme in Psalm 14. You better come with me. The fool had said in his heart, there is no Yah, they are corrupt, they have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. Yah looked down from heaven upon the children of men and see if there were any that did understand and seek Yah. They are all gone aside. They are altogether become filthy. There is none that doeth good. No, not one. Of all the workers of iniquity, no knowledge, who eats up my people, and they eat bread and call not upon Yah, there were they in great fear, for Yah is in the generations of the righteous. Are you with me? And so there are people in this world who think, and they say, you know what? We are hardwired that way. We just do what we have to do, and we live as we have to live, because when they die, they say, that's it. So they give the impression, or they tell you, that they are controlled by what we call determinism. You hear people say that, you know, I was born to be this and it will never. If you're born to die a certain way, it has to be that way. They talk about determinism. That's what they're talking about. And I must ask such people, is it determined that you will die a rich fool? Is it determined that you will die without Yah? Has it been determined that you will just made to come into the world to live ungodly, unyahly, and then you just die? Has it been? Answer me. Because I must ask you also, do you have free will? Because if you have free will and you can make choices, then that's in violation of determinism. You're not determined at all. Often you hear people, when they speak of filthiness, oh, I was born that way, they say. I don't deny that genetics may well load the gun, but it's lifestyle that pulls the trigger. You don't have to be what your grandfather was. You don't have to be a drunkard. You don't have to be promiscuous. You can make a choice. You are not determined that way. Not at all. And so, in my analysis of the rich fool and teaching beyond the reach of fools, I must borrow from Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher and philologist. Friedrich Nietzsche was a man who, in his earlier years, had gone to seminary to study as a priest. And so he was not determined that way. He chose not to be a priest and became a philologist and a philosopher. And later wrote, and I must quote today, The Madman. He wrote The Madman, the parable of the madman. And he writes, have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours? He has to be mad. Ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, I see God. I see God. As many as those who did not believe in God were standing around just then. Sounds like our culture. He provoked much laughter, the madman did. As he got lost, asked one. Did he lose his way like a child? Ask another. Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage? Emigrated? Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into the midst and pierced them with his eyes. Whither is God? He cried. I will tell you, we have killed him. You and I, all of us, are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What are we doing when we unchain the earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from the suns? Are we not plunging continually backward, sideward, forward in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Good question. Are we not staying as though an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing on us? Do we not need the light lanterns in morning? Don't we? Even though it's daylight, we're not seeing, we're living in darkness. And the madman is asking, do we need to light lanterns in daylight? The madman is asking the sane people that. Do we hear nothing as yet as the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Would you not think that our politicians and our leaders have done that? Could Yah be in our society and we are behaving the abominable ways that we are? The madman here writes, do we not smell nothing as yet as divine decomposition? Huh? How shall we comfort ourselves, he asked. the murderers of all murderers, what was holiest and mightiest of all, that the world as yet known has bled to death under the knives of our tongues, the knives of our countenances, the knives of our morals. We have daggered him. And then he asks the question. It's a searching question that we must ask. He says, what are all these churches now if they are not tombs and sepulchres of God? Because with our morals and our theology, we've killed him. What are these churches if they are not tombs and sepulchres of God? Now you understand when Yeshua says you are like white sepulchres. May it be that we learn something today. You rich fools. We have poor fools too. Because in your hearts, you have said, I will not do what he says. I will not keep his Sabbath. I will not keep his feast days. I will not love my neighbor as myself. I will not stretch out my hand and give to the poor. I will not give to the work of Yah. You will like neighbor live, or like the rich fool. But rest assured, if you live like that, you will die a fool. But rather, remember the gift of Yah is eternal life. How then can you hold on to his possession when he promises that if you share his possessions, whether it be in thought, in words, in possession, in wealth, in money, you have laid up for you a crown of righteousness. How can you then resist or reject so great a salvation? Am I to assume, therefore, that all that you have heard from Yeshua, his teaching, is beyond your reach? Then if that's so, then who are you? Except you be a fool. In Yeshua's name I pray. Amen.